people have their assumptions about this, and I tend to lean and to agree with them. But honestly, to me, the truth is that how good Georgia's defense is going to be is actually a mystery. I think it's one of the bigger unknowns with this football team. Now, I can sit here all I want, and I want to, and I really, at my core, do believe Georgia's going to have a very good defense. But I can't sit here and just guarantee it. At least I don't feel comfortable guaranteeing it because there's a ton of unknown with this version of the Georgia Bulldogs, with the 2025 Georgia Bulldogs. And there's so much new and so much transition. And a lot of it is on that defensive side of the football. And if we're just being completely fair, some serious pillars of this Georgia defense, and not just really, really good players from the last couple of years, award winners. National champions, conference champions, All-Americans. Like, that's what Georgia is losing on defense and has to replace. Now, Kirby Smart, Glenn Schumann, the staff, Trey Scott, they do a great job coaching, but they do a great job recruiting and developing as well. And it's a year in, year out defense that you have a lot of faith in. But it is a mystery. If I'm being completely fair about Georgia's defense, I don't think that we can sit here and say one way or the other and say, yeah, Georgia's defense is going to take a step back. I think it's easier to say that when you just kind of look at the names on paper and all that. But I also have a hard time being like, hey, Georgia's defense is going to get better. And there's plenty of numbers and all of that we could talk about. The truth of the matter is Georgia's defense was not as good as people thought a year ago. Ryan Curley from Dawg Post dropping that bomb right before I introduce myself. Links that you need are in the description of this video down below. And as always, I encourage you to check out our website, dawgpost.com. We're in the thick of the off season, but still trying to put out as much content as we possibly can over on the website. And sometimes it's more detailed. So go check it out. Excuse me. Subscribe to the newsletter, all that. All right, there was me pumping the site. So roughly 78% of the sack production from Georgia a year ago gone, over 50% of the tackling production. In terms of starters and people that were just out on the field a ton, Chaz Chambliss and Jalen Walker at edge rusher, Michael Williams, Tyrion Ingram-Dawkins, Warren Brinson, Nazir Stackhouse on the line. We're talking about 7 guys right there. Dan Jackson and Malachi Starks in that safety room, and Smile London. 9 important players. 9 important players for Georgia's defense headed to the NFL. Not on this team anymore. They've got to replace 9 guys. And like I said, some of these aren't normal. They're All-Americans and first-round picks, Malachi Starks. They're Butkus Award winner for the nation's best linebacker and first-round pick, Jalen Walker. Their walk-on safety, Dan Jackson, who asked for a spot on the team and fought his way. They're characters like that. They're athletic freaks like Smile Mondon. Now, sidebar, I think Georgia's linebackers are fine, and we'll get into that. But it's difficult. It's not easy to replace all that. It's not easy to replace a Michael Williams, who is not a normal football player. There's a reason why the 49ers took him with the 11th overall pick in the most recent NFL draft. They've got to replace all that. And then you look at, I kind of predicted Georgia's depth chart. That's another article, story, whatever you want to call it, that you can go look at dawgpost.com. But then you kind of get looking at Georgia's defense and you say, okay, projected starters. At edge rusher, Gabe Harris, a little bit of an unknown there, right? Like a guy who, it's his turn. We've seen him in spurts for Georgia's defense, but we haven't seen him do it a lot. Couple sacks in 2024. On the other side, a transfer guy, Elamodozi, who I am pretty high on him as a player, coming off of a season at Army where he led them in tackles for losses. He led them in sacks. He had 6.5. And I kind of think that he has a good chance to be Georgia's number 1 edge rusher, right? But it is a little bit of an unknown. How is he going to play when he's going up against SEC tackles, when he's going up against SEC guards? On the inside, right, Warren Brinson and Nazir Stackhouse, they were heavy in the rotation in the last couple of years. Tyrion Ingram-Dawkins, obviously a big part of the defensive line this past season. Well, Christian Miller, it's his turn. I think that you're kind of solid with him. I think with Jordan Hall, he's a very talented player that was a former 5-star and a guy that I think takes a step forward in 2025, obviously, with the opportunity to do so, with all these snaps that are unaccounted for. But the other truth is he's been injury prone, and he wasn't completely healthy during the spring practice. And he said, I'm not 100%. That's what he told us in the spring meetings. And, are they going to be relying on him? Xavier McLeod, a guy that they brought in from South Carolina in the transfer portal, Nasir Johnson, just kind of unproven players that haven't played a ton. And there are some freshmen that are going to get involved, most likely. And that's one of those things. Kirby only wants to play freshmen out of necessity, or if they're really, really good. It's not necessarily a bad thing. KJ Bolden was a true freshman that played a lot. Malachi Starks was a true freshman on the other side of the football. What he felt like was out of necessity. Nate Frazier played as a true freshman. Will Elijah Griffin, true freshman, ultra 5-star, one of the top prospects in this most recent recruiting class, will he get into the rotation and be a big part of Georgia's interior defensive line? We're asking those questions, right? Like, think about this. Heading into 2020, we weren't really asking the question, is Jalen Carter going to be a big part of Georgia's defensive line? Even though he was one of those ultra prospects, he wasn't as big of, there wasn't as much of a conversation around it as Elijah Griffin. Why? Georgia's not quite as established on that interior defensive line, and that's kind of where you get those questions. So the linebackers are where you feel good about things with Georgia's defense. Between Raylan Wilson, C.J. Allen, Chris Cole, Justin Williams, even the freshmen, Zayden Walker and A.J. Carrua, there's just a lot of depth at that linebacker position. They're good. They're proven. C.J. Allen has played a ton, right? Started some games in his true freshman season, was a full-time starter last year as a sophomore. Raylan Wilson climbed his way up the depth chart and was basically a starter last year in that rotation. They'll be your main two guys on the inside. And, I won't hit on the linebackers too much, but between them, Chris Cole and Justin Williams, that rotation is going to be sick. It's going to be sick. And then you move back into the secondary. Well, Georgia brought in transfers. They brought in Zion Branch from USC. They brought in Adrian Maddox from UAB. They brought in Jaden Harris from Miami. Guys that are competing for a starting job, right? KJ Bolden is going to start at safety. It looks like Janelle Aguero's the star. All right, he played some star. He started a little bit last year, dealt with some injuries the last couple of years. He's heading into year 3, and I think that he ends up taking a starting spot. At corner, look, it's more so on the defensive front before I dive into the secondary a little bit. The defensive front is where most of the question marks are. Edge rushers, pretty much new. Defensive linemen, not as proven. Will there be freshmen? I failed to mention really talented freshmen like Isaiah Gibson and Darren Ikenagbon. Do they fight for time on the defensive line? Do they fight for time as edge rushers on this football team because of how talented they are as borderline 5-stars and actual 5-star prospects in this most recent class? All right, that was kind of my tangent. But going back into the secondary, I feel pretty good about Georgia's secondary. I think between Dalen Everett, Daniel Harris, DeMello Jones, and Ellis Robinson, they've got a good cornerback duo. Whoever ends up being the full-time starter across of Dalen Everett, I think that KJ Bolden is going to be one of the best safeties in college football this coming season. And I think that they feel good about the talent that they brought in through the transfer portal at the safety position. I think Adrian Maddox and Zion Branch and Jaden Harris are going to compete with Ja'Cory Thomas for that final safety spot. Now, that's me doing some assuming that Janelle Aguero is the starting nickelback star. I think he has a strong grasp on that. I think he at least has the head start. But when you think about it, yeah, there is a lot of unproven. There is some proven. I think there's proven in the secondary and proven in the linebacker room. Now, we don't exactly know what the secondary looks like 100%, but that front, it causes question marks. And why? Because Georgia was so good when the front was so good. When Jordan Davis, Devontae Wyatt, Jalen Carter were all out there. Even in the following year when Warren Brinson and Jalen Carter and Nazir Stackhouse and Zion Logue and Jalen Walker, right? All those guys are out there. Georgia's defense was solid. You didn't question that front. You can question this front just because we haven't seen a lot out of it. And I think as a whole, you just can't say one way or the other whether Georgia's defense is going to be better when it kind of dropped off a little bit last year and they still had all that talent. What do you think about that? And I thank you for watching this video.